Well, good morning. First update of 2018. And I know that some of you have been thinking, he's used that slide for an awful long time, and the fuse never gets shorter. So I had, this update I think will be relatively short compared to other ones that I've done, just because I think it was cold and everybody kind of finally took the week off, and even people that fight wars and that type of thing, they don't like to really fight them in winter because their soldiers get very upset. So I think things backed off a little bit this week. I even saw that I think Jacob did an update this week, and it was like 39 minutes long. And you know, when you see that, you wonder, like, is he sick or something like that? You know, because it's so short. I did a couple interviews this week. I did one on Hagman Report, a little Bible teaching, and just some thoughts on some things that are going on in the legal community, or some legal issues. That was on Wednesday night, Hagman Report. You can find that. And I also did one with Cindy Hartline for Love of the Truth Radio, and that should be up on Rapture Radio soon. And also, I think she has a website for Love of the Truth. And they also put these updates up. Jackie Alnor graciously converts them to audio and puts them up on Rapture Ready in case people don't want to take all the bandwidth that they have. So today I'm going to call this powder keg. And to show you that I had some extra time yesterday, I actually made up a new title slide that, so the fuse is getting shorter, and yes, things are about ready to explode in the Middle East. So I did a lot of work on that, and so I'm gonna use it one more time, just because, without all the writing and everything, just because, you know, I might as well milk that for as much as it's worth. So it's interesting. I saw an article this week about how computers, part of the problem with modern society is they break tasks down into repetitive tasks that people do the same thing in certain jobs. They'll do the same thing over and over again. But the one point that the author of the article made was the computers allow people to become generalists again. You know, you pick up new skills. So I never worked with a green screen video and that type of thing. So I had to piece this around and play around with it. And so I think it's actually pretty good. But please hold your applause. And but it's interesting that you become. I'm an old guy. I mean. You know, and I'm playing around with a computer. I'm not like some of these guys. There's a website out there. It's called, on YouTube channel, it's called the Slow Motion Guys. I don't know if any of you've seen this. It's fascinating. Brian has, because they do stuff like I don't know, getting hit in the face with water in slow motion. One of them, you know, and they blow things up, and they blow up. I don't know if they've blown up a ketchup bottle or anything yet, but it's stuff like that, and it's very entertaining. Males find it very entertaining. I don't know what your problem is. I'm sure my wife would like, what are you watching that for? So look, to be serious, we talk a lot about these things that are happening, and the world does seem to be a bit of a powder keg, particularly in the Middle East, which is really the area where Bible prophecy is focused. So we know that we're approaching this period of time that we call Daniel's 70th week. So let's just look at some of the cultural, religious, geopolitical things that are happening or in place this week, just to kind of orient us and keep us grounded that there, you know, it seems as we look through these things that the world gets crazier and crazier every week. And boy, you know, I was listening to Hugh Hewitt the other morning. He was on when I got up early, Salem Radio, and he was talking, and he was making some good points about the Iranian protests and that type of thing, but he kept getting like, he goes, oh no, Trump just put out 4 tweets, and then he spent the next half hour talking about the tweets. And so the whole news cycle and everything is really disruptive. And so, but there are things that are encouraging in the world. This is the new, I think it's the Subaru SUV floor plan, which shows the sort of the ultimate American SUV because those numbers, those are the 19 cup holders that will be contained in that car. Now, can you imagine having 19 cup holders for a family of 7? And how many times, Daddy, I have to go to what are they thinking, So, but I know that this is a conversation we've had when we've looked at a new car. It's like, where are the cup holders? Because I don't care what the performance is, as long as I can put my coffee where I can reach it conveniently, and we don't have to fight over a cup holder. So that's sort of the ultimate. 19 cup holders in this SUV. So it is. What did they need 5 in the back for? Anyway, although I'm sitting there looking at it and I'm thinking like, wow, there's a lot of room to put junk in that's not related to liquids. So the economy's roaring along, everything. The Dow hit 25,000 for the first week. It went up 1,000 points more quickly than any time in the history of the stock exchange. Everybody's really, really excited. And then there's this report that the cashless society has finally arrived in China. And a lot of countries are trying to, and people are thinking, to get around U.S. sanctions, we'll just go to a digital currency. And so there's this press for Bitcoin and other digital currencies, cryptocurrencies. And it's interesting, how is this going to work? What's going to happen? Is the United States dollar still going to be the reserve currency of the world? And if it's not, it's going to have a huge impact on us here in the United States, in fact, of what we pay for and that sort of thing. And things have changed. I saw this morning that there's a retail store apocalypse going on. There were 8,000 or 9,000 retail stores closed in the United States last year. This year they project it'll be 12,000 because the market has changed. I mean, we all use Amazon and that type of thing. And we've even, there are some of these food services that you have. I won't name them since they're not paying me a royalty fee for sales, but really good food delivered to your home. You put it together and fantastic, fresh and tasty and all that stuff. And it's changing. That'll change how people go to restaurants. It'll change. And so maybe restaurants will close because people won't go out as much. And you have, the impact of home digital entertainment on movie theaters. And movie theaters are struggling. I think part of the problem is Hollywood's putting out lousy movies and and they're the same thing, it's like, I think I saw an interview with Ron Howard. He said there are really only 7 stories, they say, and maybe there's only one, he said, and I think there's probably only one, it's just you tell it different ways. Interesting thing. But with this cashless society and digital things, it raises the specter of some problems. There was this report this week about everybody running around because there are flaws in the chip, not in the software, but in the hardware of chips that allow them to be taken over by hackers. And so they've recommended that the recommended thing is, here's the solution, replace everything that you own. Now, yeah, replace everything, because the chips are flawed. You'll have to get new chips. So they're putting out software, but some of the software that they put out, fixes that they put out, will slow down your computer, and people don't want their computer to be slowed down. So how serious this is going to be remains to be seen. At the same time, there's this hope. This is from USA Today Money the other week, and the cover of the current Economist magazine about artificial intelligence and what they're talking about, doomsday scenario or age of wonder. I have to say, when I see headlines like this and then people tell me that technology is the solution, I'm a little bit skeptical that we've got a handle on what we're really facing as things go on. But one of the points to make is that we live at a very epic time where things are changing quickly. And definitions of things and what it means to be human are changing and being challenged. I don't think it's a good thing. I think it plays into Bible prophecy and a coming world ruler that we talk about a lot that will try to take things over. We'll try to use this technology to further control over people. It also plays out, and Pam and I went to a movie. We rarely go to movies, but we were in California a few years ago, and we went to see one of the Marvel comic movies, a Winter Soldier, Captain America, Winter Soldier. And we came out of that, and I was really struck by that movie. And one of the reasons I went to it was they filmed part of it up in Cleveland, and I figured if I was, sort of locked in the courthouse where they were filming a scene on the street for a while, I might as well go see the movie and see what all the hubbub was about. But one of the things that you get out of that movie and X-Men and other things is this superhuman. Everybody wants to be a superhuman, like Captain America. We'll give you a pill or some kind of radiation and you'll become a superhuman. And it also plays out, and we're having trouble defining what it means to be male and female. This was a study that was put out by a group, Characteristics of Mental Health of Gender Nonconforming Adolescents in California, recently done. And what they found is that among California adolescents, according to this study, ages 12 to 17, by gender conformity level, meaning you believe if you're male, you believe you're a male. If you're female, you believe you're a female. Gender nonconforming is you think you're something other than the sex that you were born. And what they found in this California survey was that between ages 12 and 17, 27% of California students are gender nonconforming. 6% are highly nonconforming, and 20% are androgynous, which means could go either way. Do you understand the significance of that survey as to what it means for religion and culture and that sort of thing? And I think this fostering these ideas and these notions is child abuse. I think it's very dangerous. They complain that these people are prone to suicidal thoughts, but even I think I've cited the study from Dr. McCabe at Johns Hopkins, who's a psychiatrist, and I don't even know if he's a Christian, by the way, who said that they stopped doing sex change operations at Johns Hopkins because they found that the people that came out of there were, 14, 15, 22 times more likely to commit suicide. Because it goes against your grain. And look, this is not, my heart breaks when I see people that are struggling with this. It really does, because it's very difficult. And so I want them to get help. I want them to get saved and that type of thing. But understand that this is California. California, as of January 1st, and you may have seen some signs that were sort of photoshopped that welcome to California, and California is now a sanctuary state, welcome illegal aliens, drug dealers, and all that type of thing. Now, those signs were made up. California wasn't stupid enough to actually put the sign up, but they've done everything to do the stupid things that they've done about becoming a sanctuary state. And they're violating federal law. Attorney General Jeff Sessions recently put out some things that he's going to enforce marijuana laws in the United States, unlike the Obama administration. And now everybody in Colorado and Oregon and California, other places that have marijuana stores that you can go in and they allow recreational use of marijuana, are upset. Well, how dare you tell us what to do? This is kind of ironic, isn't it? California, who tells everybody what to do, who tells churches that you have to provide abortion under your medical plans, tells religious schools that you have to do this, tells religious people that you have to do things. They're now concerned, well, the federal government's telling us what to do. That's just awful. Which means that this is true of the left, is they always project. So whatever they're saying is what they do. So if they're calling somebody else a fascist, why? It's because they're the fascists. That's exactly right. It happens. It's a pretty good rule of thumb. It's one of the rules of thumb is, the left is usually wrong, and Germany, geopolitically is usually wrong, and that type of thing. So let's look at some of the things geopolitically. So here is Macron, and I'll mention him a little bit more in a moment. But there's this Macron is you see him thrown up in the news media all the time as the savior of Europe. He wants to make the world great again. I mean, he said that. They call Trump a megalomaniac for wanting to make America great again, and Macron walks around saying he wants to make the world great again, and that's okay. I mean, that's not out there. This is in this morning's New York Times. The world could use more kings and queens, monarchists say. That's kind of interesting when you look at, everybody says, oh, Trump's a dictator, he's all this and that type of thing. And, listen, I have mixed feelings about President Trump, I will confess to you. There's things he does that I like. There are things that make me uncomfortable. And the world is, just talking about the president, the world is divided because there is one group that says Trump is evil and the Antichrist. I mean, there are people that say he's going to be the Antichrist. And on the other side, there are people that say he's doing fantastic. He's not doing anything wrong. Everything is perfect. And there are these extremes. And we're at this time, I mentioned this in my interview with Cindy the other night, saw a video of Obama made up, saying things that he didn't say. But it looked very real, and we're reaching this point in time where it's going to become increasingly difficult to figure out what is true and what is not as true. And this is prophetic on an epic scale. Jesus said in the Olivet Discourses, more than anything else, he warned about this. Take heed that no man, deceive you. Now, when Jesus gives a warning like that, and Paul says in 2 Timothy 3 and elsewhere that in the latter days, perilous times will come, and people will be deceived and giving themselves over to fables, are we not there? I don't know how else to say it. Are we there or not? And so stay grounded in the Word of God. That's truth. And you have people running around questioning that. And so here's a CNN report this week. Can Emmanuel Macron save Europe in 2018? Listen to what it says. And look, I'm not saying that Macron is so-and-so. I want you to understand that, okay? I see these people thrown up as candidates for the Antichrist, and I keep thinking, I think the devil can do better than that, okay? But nevertheless, he's trying to, and there is, one view of where the Antichrist will come from is a revived Roman Empire based in Europe, and Macron's doing all this stuff that seems to indicate that he would fit that pattern. The French president wants to do away with the Europe of nations to create something much closer to a nation of Europe. He wants the EU to have its own finance minister, its own budget, its own economic governance. He believes it should have its own army and border police force. He wants a harmonized tax system and politically a stronger European parliament with transnational parties and lists, which proves that Macron has become the ultimate Frenchman and that he surrendered in the first 6 months to these other ideas. You'll have to think about that a little bit. The answer, he believes, is for Europe to at last answer the question of what it is, a loose federation of European nations or a federal European Union. It is the question that has divided and bedeviled Europe since its creation. And until Macron's meteoric rise to power, the former had been defended with far more vigor than the latter. Now that the latter has a champion willing not only to speak up for it, but to stake his substantial political capital in the necessity of its success, if Macron gets his way, Europe will take a massive leap to become much closer, in the end, to what its founding fathers had envisaged, but very different from what it has become. And part of this is because what's going on in Germany, which is the economic power of Europe, is that they can't form a government. And there was an article this week in the Wall Street Journal, I think it was on Thursday, talking about there were, and don't quote me on the statistics, I didn't put it in the slide. In the last parliamentary elections, people from 15 political parties won seats in parliament. Well, that means you have to have a form of coalition government. I mean, it's similar to what happens in Israel and other parliamentary systems. And people are so divided now, everybody's forming their own party. Or, they're forming many parties. Well, so they've gone from 15 a few years ago in Italy to the recent parliamentary elections where I think they had 31 parties win seats. And how are they going to form a government? And the same thing is happening in Germany. They can't form a government and govern. So somebody like Macron steps into the breach and says, well, let's just form a United Nations of Europe, a Europe country. And every attempt that they've made has failed. Well, we had 2 world wars that were fought over people that were trying to unite Europe that had probably 100 million people dead in the 20th century. I don't think it's going to work. But, here is this, the savior of Europe. Here along comes Emmanuel Macron, and everybody is willing to jump on board with him. At the same time that this is happening, we've talked about China's One Belt, One Road desire to build this new Silk Highway from China through the Middle East to Europe. And they're making a lot of progress. And this week, Xi, the head of China, came out and said, guys in the army, don't fear death. In other words, you do what I tell you, and it may be very difficult. Well, the thing that I think from a Bible prophecy standpoint that's a little bit interesting and difficult, and what does it mean, is these protests that are taking place in Iran. And it's very difficult to get good information. The government, the Islamic Republic government is, they're dictators, and they control information. As these protests have spread, they have shut down social media, Twitter, and that type of thing. Yet people are still finding ways to kind of communicate on their cell phones. And unlike the Iranian Revolution that happened back when they overthrew the Shah back in 1978-79, 40 years ago, social media has a much bigger presence and power. It's much more difficult to suppress information and that sort of thing. So here is, and so these protests have spread. They started in some of the areas outside of Tehran. And the mullahs are trying to figure out what they do. They're trying to control things. Here is Michael Ramirez. Michael Ramirez is a brilliant editorial cartoonist, because what you're seeing here is, of course, Iran is unraveling because of protests. You see how he says that? I mean, it's a brilliant piece of art because it communicates so much. President Trump has come out and says that he backs them. Other people in the world are like, oh, not so quick, President Trump. You shouldn't be speaking like this. You shouldn't be saying things. Of course, all of the pro-Iranian Obama administration people are running around about how terrible it is that Trump has said to support this. Rouhani has come out, and other people in Iran have said, well, the people behind this are the Americans and the Jews. Of course, it's always the Jews. This was 12 dead at one point in time. Now it's, I think, up to 21 dead. And there's been hundreds of thousands of people in the streets. We just don't know where it goes. Iran has a lot of problems. For example, there are 30 million Iranians who are upset because there's been austerity cuts for public services and pensions and public guaranteed payments, like welfare payments. 30 million out of 80 million Iranians are having their benefits cut, and they're upset about that. And why are they upset about that? Because they saw that under this Obama deal, the Iranian deal, they got back $150 billion or more, and they were allowed to start participating in global markets again. And they're saying, where did that $150 billion go? Now, you need to understand, the Iranian Revolutionary Guards, the Al-Quds Force, and Soleimani, under the control of Soleimani, and Ayatollah Khamenei himself is estimated, this was a 2013 report that was, I think, in the London Telegraph, the Daily Telegraph out of London. Khamenei controlled, at that time, a fortune of $95 billion. If you remember, there was another Iranian mullah, a guy named Rafsanjani. I think he was a foreign minister at one time. He kind of fell out of favor because he opposed Ahmadinejad, or I'm mad about jihad, as we used to call him, back in the 2009 elections. And he passed away 2 years ago, this week actually. He was estimated to control a fortune of between 20 and $25 billion. And they do this, they take over, and the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, even Rouhani has been trying to dial back some of their participation in business, and that's how they maintain power in a dictatorship, is they spread the money around. Now, Khamenei doesn't live like a king, from what I understand. He lives a relatively austere lifestyle, but he controls $95 billion. There's only one person in the world, at least in the Forbes list, that's above that, and that's Bezos from Amazon, who finally hit $100 billion. So don't dismiss this as it's an easy thing to overthrow these guys, because they have a lot of money to throw around, and they sent all these people out. The UN has been meeting to talk about this. This editorial in the Saudi Arabian Arab News, this lady wrote, called Moscow Aims to Be the Middle East Safety Valve. I'll talk a little bit more about this. There's people being killed. I think it's up, last I saw it was up to 21. Here's John Brennan, former CIA director. And I want to ask you a question. Have you ever heard a former CIA director do anything like this? No. He is, I always thought he was a hack. With wholesale condemnation of Iran and nuclear deal over the past year, Trump administration squandered opportunity to bolster reformists in Tehran and prospects for peaceful political reform in Iran. Bluster is neither a strategy nor a mechanism for exercise of U.S. power and influence. And by the way, let me just make a comment about this book by, is it Michael Wolff, Fire and Fury? And Steve Bannon saying all this. Even Wolff, don't pay attention to that book. Even he comes out and says, I don't know if these stories are true. I'm just, I haven't verified them. But listen, he comes out with this book, and what happens? Well, the media talks about the book. Whether it's true or not, it doesn't make any difference to the media. It just gives them an opportunity. Well, this is controversial. It's in the news. Well, it's in the news because you're talking about it. There's a two-word admonition. If you don't know what you're talking about, it's sort of a be quiet is the nice version of that. So these protests are ongoing, and there's a lot of talk, like what does it mean? What's going to happen? Bible prophecy teachers are talking about what do the protests mean? What's going to happen? Does this mean that Ezekiel 38 and 39 is off? Is the regime going to fall? If the regime falls, what does that mean? And it's very difficult to know exactly what's happened. They started in this city, they've spread to other cities, there's hundreds of thousands of people in the streets. The Iranian government is now coming out saying, oh, it's not that bad. These days of sedition are over. It seems to be there's been less protests over the past few days. It's very difficult to overcome a bloodthirsty, totalitarian regime like that with peaceful protests. It's going to take blood in the streets to overthrow them. I mean, the Revolutionary Guards are not going to go away. There's a couple 100,000 of them, and they're well armed. and well trained, and they're not gonna go away easily. So a lot of good articles. There was a good article in the Jerusalem Post about Iranian protests and what do they mean, the truth about Iran's arrest. In some parts of the media, you can't even find anything about it. This article in the Jerusalem Post, under the heading Middle Israel, the truth about Iran's unrest, he went through in a very good analysis, I think. I'm not sure what day this was in the Jerusalem Post. I think it was either Thursday or Friday. And he said, look, is this like nothing? Or is it like the fall of the Soviet Union in 1989? What's it going to be? And he says, right now I don't see a leader like Gorbachev who would step in and sort of let the Soviet Union fall apart. Without that, he says, I think it's more like the Soviet Union. Iran may be coming apart. I don't know. The one thing that I say, here's Melanie Phillips talking about it, Europe is pretty quiet about what's going on. I mean, they're all over Poland's case because they say Poland's not a true democracy and want to kick Poland out of the European Union. But, Iran, they can, shoot protesters in the streets dead. And we don't have any comment about that. It's a strange world. But there's more going on here. In Daniel chapter 10, we read about the fact that Daniel was praying, and he prayed and fasted for 21 days. And we see in verse 12 that finally the angel comes to him and says, then he said, Daniel, fear not, Daniel, for from the first day thou didst set thine heart to understand, this is Daniel chapter 10, and to chasten thyself before thy God, thy words were heard, and I am come for thy words. But the prince of the kingdom of Persia withstood me 21 days. But lo, Michael, one of the chief princes, came to help me, and I remained there with the kings of Persia. So we know, and we know from the New Testament, it tells us that we don't war against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers. And there are really real demonic, evil influence behind these countries. And one is the Prince of Persia. And it talks about this entity coming again in the end days. And it's a battle. I mean, one of the angels of the Lord God's angels was dispatched and fought against this guy for 21 days. And until Michael came along, the archangel, to help him, he couldn't get through to Daniel. And he said, now I am come to make thee understand what shall befall thy people in the latter days, for yet the vision is for many days. And when he had spoken such words unto me, Daniel says, I set my face to the ground, and I became speechless. So, let's see. In Revelation chapter 12, we also see that this spiritual battle will take place in the end times again. I think this is talking about the middle of the 70th week. And this is the passage that early, saw a sign in the heavens, and the woman and the man-child, and the woman fled into the wilderness. You can read through that. But in chapter 12, verse 12 of Revelation chapter 12, it says, therefore rejoice, ye heavens, and ye that dwell in them. Woe to the inhabitants of the earth, and the seal, for the devil is come down unto you, having great wrath, because he knoweth that he hath but a short time. So I think we need to look at the context of what's going on geopolitically. We know that it's ultimately a spiritual battle. We know that there's a prince, an evil prince behind, a spiritual evil prince behind Persia, which is Iran. And we know that in the middle of the 70th week, when the devil is cast down to the earth, there's war in heaven. Michael and the devil's cast down to the earth. And then literally all hell breaks loose on the earth. And Satan, it says here, pours out his wrath on the earth. It'll be a really difficult time. Jesus described it as a period of great tribulation, such as like the world has never seen nor ever shall. Why? Because the devil knows his time is short. So when you look at what's going on in Iran and you see 30 million people that are getting their benefits cut, You see Iran being kind of stretched. We'll see in a moment that Russia is kind of stretched. It indicates that, to me, if this is the time for Bible prophecy to be fulfilled, and I think it is, that I don't expect the Iranian Revolution. I certainly hope that it would happen. And there are many people coming to the Lord in Iran, by the way, too. There's a revival going on there from all reports that I've received from people. But the mullahs will know that they have but a short time also. And they may think, and what do dictatorial regimes that are under pressure from outside, from inside and out, what do? They try to create an external enemy. Well, who's the natural external enemy of the Persians? Not the Persian government, not necessarily the Persian people, but the Persian government. It's America and Israel. And there are wars prophesied, and Persia's part of an invading army that comes in. Now you move over there to the northern part of Israel, north of Israel and Syria, and there are still large areas of Syria that are controlled by rebel forces of different stripes. Some are just anti-government, many are extremist, Islamic terrorist groups like Al-Qaeda and outgrowths of Al-Qaeda. And they're fighting for control of that area. And it's largely the Alawite, which I would say is sort of a subset of Shiite Islam, not quite, but sort of. That's the ruling family's strain of Islam, the Assad family. And you have the Sunnis, which are the rebel groups. And what Putin has done is, and the Assyrian government is, they've bombed the Syrian areas to get them out of there. Now there's the eastern part of Syria, area called Ghouta, and other parts are still under control of Sunni groups. And they're starving them out, they're bombing them out. There was the NATO general that testified in front of Congress a couple years ago and said, what Assad and Putin have done is they've tried to get the Sunnis to pick up and move and go someplace else. And a lot of them went to Europe, and now there are all kinds of problems in Europe. There are lots of people missing in Syria. I mean, half the country doesn't live where it is, and the death toll is probably close to 1 million, if not over 1 million. 1 out of every 20 people. So that would mean a few people in this room would be gone from what they were 7 years ago. Dead, not gone, dead. Mark Langfan, who's a lawyer, has done some great work about Israel security. You can look him up at marklangfan.com. Has an article in Aretz Shiva this week about Putin's Titanic has hit a fatal Middle East iceberg. Now, I think Mark's article is optimistic. He says here, the problem for Putin is that Putin has put all of his Middle East eggs in the Shiite Ayatollah's basket. And that basket has just crashed to the ground. Now, I think he's a little bit optimistic. Let's hope that he's right. Let's talk cash. Putin has sold Iran and Syria weapons on credit, essentially based on the assumption of Iran's solvency. Putin doesn't have any money to begin with, so Putin has to borrow money and put the sovereign Russian accounts in debt to pay for the weapon he sells to Iran and Syria in return for Iranian and Syrian debt. Not a wise move. But I want you to understand the scenario, at least what the majority of people hold, is that this Ezekiel 38:39 war happens in the northern mountains of Israel, Persia, Turkey, and then this other entity, many of us think it's Russia, is drawn into this battle to take spoil. What is happening with Putin? He's trying to project influence and power. He's got an election coming up this year. He'll likely to win since one of the big people was just declared ineligible to run against him. But he needs money. You know, there's been an interruption in his cash flow too. There were some explosions at major gas transit facilities in Austria and elsewhere that have really put the pressure on gas. And what do we know that Israel's doing? They're building a pipeline. It's going to take a while, but they're building a pipeline into Europe to supply gas. But Russia needs money. They have the people are concerned that China is moving in to take over Siberia. They have a lot of immigration from China there. So it says here, next, Putin's Russian weapons have co-partnered in the Iranian genocide of 500,000 Sunni Arabs in Syria. But Putin has just realized that neither he nor Iran has the money to cement any form of Assad's Syrian post-war pro-Russian regime. Close to 20% of Russia is made up of vast territories comprised of Sunni Muslims. The current Iranian revolution is lighting the fire under all those Sunni Muslims and encouraging them to revolt against Putin, just as the Iranians are revolting against their brutal tyrannical ayatollahs. The Sunni Russians would love to execute their own Me Too campaign against Putin. So here's what you have, is you have a demographic time bomb in Russia, which means, for lack of a better term, they have but a short time. You have Iran, which has a demographic time bomb, a growing youthful population where the unemployment rate is 25% or more. The mullahs look and they see what? We have but a short time. So if this revolution does not succeed, and things go on as they were, that does not change the fact that both Russia and Russia and Iran have a very short time window in which they should act. At the same time that that's going on, you have all these other things going on with regard to the world's focus on Israel and Jerusalem. And again, this is part of what I talk about, although I've talked about this for years, this convergence of all of these events at the same time. Add into the mix Turkey, which we know is part of this Ezekiel 38 and 39 coalition, and Libya and Sudan. And the things that are going on there that also indicate what? They have but a short time. The world is in 2018, I think, will be fairly turbulent. At the same time, everybody's running around. The stock market is up and everything's great. But there are little ripples in that nice little smooth sail. You know how it is when it's smooth sailing. I remember the first time I went water skiing, my friend said, "You've never been water skiing and you're a big guy, it's going to be hard to get you up." But it was the lake that night was like glass, and my friend said to me, "If you can't ski tonight, you can't ski." Well, so in the world economy now, everything is smooth sailing, but there are these ripples. And I think they're going to build into waves and eventually a tsunami. On the northern border of Israel at Beit Shan, it is located in Syria. On the left of the large map on the right, you see Israel, Golan Heights, you see Maja Shams, which is a Druze village in far northern Israel, right up near the Lebanon border, right at the base of where you would go up to the Mount Hermon ski area. And Pam and I drove through there when we were there in May. And so 5 kilometers from there, there's cities that some have surrendered to the Syrian army, to forces Hezbollah, Iran, Syria. And the rebels have been given passage down to Dara, which is down near Jordan. Just think of it as directly east, about 30 miles from where the Jordan River comes out of the south end of the Sea of Galilee. So they've been given some free passage there. They've surrendered. They've done things like they've blown up all the rebels that are leaving. They've blown up all their computers, materials, because they don't want to be. They even went to the graves of people that have been killed in the fighting and obliterated the graves so that the Assad government would not come in and do what? See who's buried there, go get his family and torture their family. And other people would disappear like other people. You need to understand, Assad is often portrayed as this kind-hearted, genteel optometrist or ophthalmologist, but he's brutal like his daddy was. It's war, okay? So these people are leaving. They're going down to Dara, which is also down near the border of Israel. You can see down here on the map on the left, you see Dara down there in the lower corner, just to the right of where it says Jordan. And that's where the Syrian civil war started. So some of this area is still sort of under the influence, control of ISIS, right there in that little point there just to the east of the Sea of Galilee, which you can see there in that map on the left. So there's a great article in the Jerusalem Post. I won't read all of it, but I will read some of it. And I'm trying to remember who wrote it. It's a very good article. It was in, I think it's in it's either today's or Friday's Jerusalem Post. Beit Jen, Syria, between Israel's dilemma and Iran's opportunity. There was a prevailing belief, the author says, in the first years of the Syrian war that the sides would exhaust each other, apparently beneficially, and that the Assad regime would emerge from the fight weakened. In fact, Syrian dictator Bashar Assad, to prevent the collapse of his regime and to protect himself from international courts, he was a prime suspect in the International Tribunal investigating the 2005 assassination of Lebanese Prime Minister Rafik Hariri, tied his fate to the rogue Iranian state. Now, 7 years later, many seem certain that Assad and his Iranian allies control the war and are steering it to achieve their long-term goals. Indeed, they have imposed this asymmetrical war on the Syrian people and determine the time and place to instigate it after preparing for it for many years in the military, security, economic, political, diplomatic, and communications areas. And he goes on to say, now the mullahs are using the lessons learned from 8 years of fighting Iraq and decided not to fight a state-to-state war with Iran's regular army and not to follow the fighting to start on Iran's borders. Iran has instead opted for infiltration, the creation of division and sectarianism, undermining the status quo in Arab countries by pumping in money and weapons to fight Arabs with Arab use on Arab soil, and even worse is that they are mobilizing the survivors to fight against their enemies to fulfill their historic nationalistic dream. Although the theocratic state seeks to eventually dominate the wealthy Gulf states, it does not dare attack Saudi Arabia directly because it is home to the two holy mosques which are close to the hearts of 1.5 billion Muslims, the same hearts the Iranians would like to win over to Shiism. Naturally, the shortest and easiest way to win these hearts and minds is through the removal of Israel and the liberation of Jerusalem. Now, I read that, and I read a lot of things, and there's a few things that I read that give me chills, and that's one of them. I'll repeat what he says. Naturally, the shortest and easiest way to these hearts and minds is through the removal of Israel and the liberation of Jerusalem. Therefore, we find that they are fully immersed in preparation for that battle. Now, question. Does the Bible say that something like that will happen? Yes. Are people, countries, principalities lining up to do that? The answer is, it sure looks like it. Should people in the church that believe in the scripture take note of that? Should pastors talk about it? Yes. And what happens? Very few talk about it. Everybody wants to just pretend that it's not going to happen. Here's that article. Isam Zeitun, Zeitun. Now listen to this. I don't like to, but I think this is very good. Israel's, of course, now in a very uncomfortable situation because Iranian-backed militias now control Beit Jen, as well as the mountain passages linking Lebanon, Syria, and Israel. Their incursion into the rough terrain of Mount Hermon constitutes a real threat to Israel's national security. On the other hand, because the Druze of southern Syria look to these militias for protection, Israel would have a difficult time defeating them without also harming the Druze of Druze Mountain, Jabal al-Arab, whom Israel has vowed to protect. So far, Israeli humanitarian initiatives have altered stereotypes of Israel in the eyes of the Syrian citizens revolting for the sake of freedom. Israel good neighbor policies have dispersed all the allegations against Israel put forward by Syrian media, its educational institution, even its politicized religious podiums, which have been brainwashing people for generations. However, the recent Israeli declaration of commitment to protect the Druze population has surprised many, since it comes just as these same Druze invite in Iranian militias and even rush to join them to protect Assad and the Iranian project. And so the Druze that you see in Majel Shams, in the northern part of Israel, they have kin across the border. There are cities up there that were divided by the '67 war. And they're Druze on one side and Druze on the others. And there's families here and they have family over here. And it's a very difficult situation for Israel to manage. And because this is a tribal area. Let's see. This will lead to more confusion and a complication of the rebel position to the benefit of Iran, which is now very close by, and a policy of complacency and reacting will no longer be useful. The complex regional and international arena adds to the risk and dangers of all options for Israel. What does that mean? Israel is being isolated on the world stage. On the other hand, the least dangerous, costly, and closest to reality would be if the Israeli government were to use its influence to coordinate with reasonable Druze sheiks in Israel to implement a non-aggression pact between the Druze and Sunni villages in the Golan with the supervision and the guarantee of the IDF, which is a neutral party able to ensure the success of this endeavor. By neutralizing the threat both to and within the Druze communities of southern Syria, Israel would be taking a card from the Iranian hand. We already have international agreements that can come back into force or even be modified to ensure the full implementation of a demilitarized zone under the auspices of the UN. That's a little fanciful. The best way for Israel to advance the cause of protecting the honorable Druze sect is to rescue them from being mobilized into fantastic Iranian wars of domination. You need to go look this article up, Beit-Jan, Between Israel's Dilemma and Iran's Opportunity. Open your Bible, Ezekiel 38 and 39, and look at this article. And tell me that there's not a connection between the two, especially when you think that this invasion from the north of Israel, what are to the north of Israel? Mountains, the mountains of Lebanon, Syria, the Golan Heights. And where are all these people? Where's all this stuff going on right now? The mountains of Israel. The slopes of Mount Hermon are where the eastern slopes of this great mountain, probably where Jesus went and was transfigured, is just to the west of Beit-Jan and these other areas. I think very significant. At the same time, this article from Caroline Glick on Friday, Trump kicks America's Palestinian habit, how things are going on. And listen, things are going on that are kind of on the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. There are things going on. We're withdrawing aid. We said, okay, Palestine, you don't want to come to peace negotiations? No more money. And this is making the Palestinians upset. Now listen, when Trump made the announcement, it's been almost 4 weeks ago now, that he would recognize Jerusalem as Israel's capital. What did they say? Oh, the Palestinian territories, it's going to melt down, violence, it's going to be terrible. And what's happened? A little bit, okay? Yeah, there are protests and there's been some clashes. This was in the Arab News this morning, front page from Saudi Arabia. Arabs seek recognition for Palestine with East Jerusalem as its capital. Well, this is what they're saying publicly. So this is the front page of the Saudi Arabian newspaper. I'm going to turn to a source, and I know I don't trust everything that they say, but they're a news organization, and sometimes they have to get it right. The New York Times, front page this morning. Tapes reveal tacit acceptance by Arabs of Jerusalem decision of Trump. Listen to what this says. But now a de facto alliance against shared foes such as Iran, the Muslim Brotherhood, Islamic State militants, and the Arab Spring uprisings is drawing the Arab leaders into an ever closer collaboration with their one-time nemesis, Israel, producing especially stark juxtapositions between their posturing in public and private. Mr. Trump's decision broke with a central premise of 50 years of American-sponsored peace talks, defied decades of Arab demands that East Jerusalem be the capital of Israel, of a Palestinian state, and stoked fears of a violent backlash across the Middle East. Arab governments, mindful of the popular sympathy for the Palestinian cause, rushed to publicly condemn it. Now, there's some questions as to how far these Arab governments have gone and are willing to go. But their public face in some respects is, we're against this. And behind the scenes, and this is reported in the New York Times this morning, the Saudi Arabians called Abbas in and said, give up on the idea of Jerusalem. Now, Saudi Arabia's denied this, by the way. They will. You have to understand how they negotiate. Saudi Arabia called Abbas in and said, give up on the idea of East Jerusalem. There's a little town just to the east of East Jerusalem. Use that as their capital, or just build it and stay in Ramallah where you already are, and give up on this notion. And so the Palestinians are feeling abandoned right now. And they are being, because they're bigger fish to fry, because why? Iran is coming in. They're building their highway, literally and figuratively, from Tehran to the Mediterranean. And I don't think Russia's a big fan of that either. They're kind of keeping them at bay. And it is, I think, today's Haim report, check that out, jerusalemjournal.net, the Haim report, Chaim, by Brian Schrager. He makes up a nice little meme picture every day. And today the picture is Spock and the doctor playing four-dimensional chess. And that, because that's what's going on. It's four-dimensional chess, geopolitical chess in the Middle East. And it's a good picture of it. Now, some significant things. First of all, this article, front page of the Jerusalem Post, relic from First Temple era unearthed near Western Wall. A little signet ring seal, a wax seal that would be put on a scroll, was found in Jerusalem. And this was unusual because it was a state-sponsored or state-authorized archaeological dig. And so what do you hear? You hear UNESCO and all these. The Jews have no connection to Jerusalem. And so when this is happening, what happens? We dig things up and we find that archaeology actually proves it. One could say that in some respects, the stones are crying out. That they have a historical connection to this land, that it is their homeland. And the world wants to deny it. So, look, I'm all for the U.S. tax dollars not funding UNESCO and these crazy people. And boy, that's causing a lot of problems. I'll talk about that in just a moment. I can see that my goal of getting this done quicker than ever is fast approaching. What does this have to do with anything? This is the Arch of Titus. The Arch of Titus in Rome has a panel there. I've seen it with my own eyes. This panel on the Arch of Titus. And it shows the Roman armies carrying away the temple menorah. You see the trumpets there. There's a exhibition going on at Yeshiva University in New York through, I think, January 18th. And what they did was they did a laser measurement of this section of the Arch of Titus in Rome, and they turned it into a plaster thing. And then what they've done in the part of this exhibition is that they turned it into a color picture. Because what they found as they analyzed it was that there was some yellow paint, remnants of a yellow paint that they could find on the relief at the Arch of Titus. So it made up, that's the color that they used for the menorah. Now, some of this is speculation, and some of this they're filling in. There were parts of this, that have been destroyed. But it's kind of an interesting thing that in New York City, blocks from the UN, the UN is saying, Jews, you don't have any connection to Jerusalem. It's really not your capital. We'll have to negotiate that. But here is people putting this up, and then they find this coin that's not from the Second Temple era that was destroyed by the Romans in 70 AD, but from the First Temple that was built by Solomon. Very significant things. So, in Israel, they're divided. This is this gal that is Palestinian gal from a village near Jerusalem. She's been charged with slapping a soldier, and of course, Haaretz, the left-wing magazine in Israel, says, "Oh, this is terrible. It's just giving her credibility. We should just let her go. This is awful that they're prosecuting this gal for slapping an Israeli soldier." Now, Caroline Glick has an article from last Tuesday where she says, or maybe it was a week ago, Friday, one of her last three columns was about this family that this lady comes from, and they've been involved in terrorism for decades. She's commonly referred to in some parts of the Israeli press as Shirley Temper, because she's been doing this for years. Now, I want to make one suggestion, and I know, okay, you're going to say this, and everybody's going to think you're crazy. We went to Hebron. This is no man's land in Hebron. It's one of the most divided places you will ever go. If you want to go to the epicenter of the Arab-Israeli conflict, go to Hebron. This used to be a thriving market 20-some years ago. They shut it down after a terrorist attack by an Israeli on the mosque part at the cave of Machpelah. And so they divided the city. And you will not find any more place more divided on the planet. It's like the epicenter of that division. So here we have the U.S. As this is going on, we're withdrawing things. Nikki Haley is being criticized heavily within the State Department for doing these things at the UN. This is from Foreign Policy. Nikki Haley's diplomacy of revenge targets UN relief agency. And from one article that I read this week, if we're not all remember, with the United States joining an organization in which it's expected to pay more than its fair share. In 2016, it contributed over $8 billion to the UN. Of that sum, $3 billion went to the UN regular and peacekeeping budgets. The rest went to UN's affiliated budgets. China, France, Russia, and the United Kingdom, the other four permanent members of the Security Council, contributed a total of $2.5 billion. The United States, in short, contributes more than 3 times as much as all the other permanent Security Council members combined. And the State Department is going crazy. The people that have been working at state for a long time, oh, I can't believe Nikki Haley's doing this, will be laughed at on the world stage. And part of me says, I'm tired of we're being played for the fool on the world stage, and I'm tired, and it's about time somebody stood up and stopped that. So, this cave of Machpelah, and I'll finish with this. I know people will say I'm crazy for thinking this way. So I'm going to think out loud, and I will accept people's criticism. We know that there is a temple going to come and be built of some fashion. It might be like a tabernacle. Who knows exactly what form it will take. And we know that this is the hope and dream. We know that it'll be used for an improper purpose, and we're all aware of that. And everybody says it just can't happen. So people come up with different theories. Well, it's not going to be on the Temple Mount. It'll be over here. Well, if it's over here, it's still going to be a big deal. I was just thinking about this the other night, and it struck me that, you can go to Hebron today, the most divided place I've ever seen in my life. It has had a huge impact on me. You should know that because I've talked about it a lot. The division between Arab and Jew there is just, it's every corner, it's every step that you take. And here at this cave of Machpelah, which is the second holiest site in Judaism, number 2, next to the Temple Mount. On top of that there, on the right, is a synagogue. and on the left is a mosque. Now, they have separate entrances, but they've been that way for a long time, for 50 years. And I would suggest to you that it has not caused, it's divided, and there's violence, and there's problems, and the young soldiers there, when you go through the checkpoints, they will be very careful. Do you have any knives? And why do they ask you that? Because their colleagues, their comrades have been stabbed and killed at that checkpoint. But today, there is a mosque and a Jewish worship place up on top of that building built by Herod. And I was just thinking that when did that change take place? It took place when the Arabs were weak. And my thought is that right now, with the turmoil from the Arab Spring and the Arab world, this is why Saudi Arabia is seeking to do an alliance with Israel. That's why Russia's come in. The Arab, the Muslims are somewhat weak. They're very divided. Could this be the time when a temple could be built? I mean, we were told, were we not, just 4 weeks ago, the Arab world would melt down over Trump's declaration. Now, it ignores the fact that for 7 years, the Arab world has been melting down. Was going to be more melting? I'm only suggesting to you that maybe the time is ripe for that other element of end times Bible prophecy to take place. People oppose that. Somebody just sent me this before I walked up here. In the Veil Daily, and I'll close with this. And by the way, there was a recent article in the New Yorker by Tim Keller from Presbyterian Church in New York City, Manhattan, talking about, oh, it's so terrible, these evangelicals, they're so evil, they supported Trump, they supported Roy Moore, and we're so embarrassed by this, and we need to speak out against this, and we can't be identified with this. Did that man ever open his mouth to say anything about a president that supported partial birth abortion, abortion on demand, and other things like that? It drips with hypocrisy and self-righteous judgmentalism. And then this article in Veil Daily, somebody just sent it to me. Why are so many evangelicals friends of Israel? By a Presbyterian pastor from Arvada, California. And he has some organization that he does, the living history, essentially does sort of enactments of Jonathan Edwards and Thomas Jefferson and that type of thing. This is not kind to people who believe that Israel is important. Listen to some of what he says. Evangelicals believe the ancient divine promise of land to Abraham applies to the modern nation state of Israel established in 1948. Next paragraph. Some evangelicals skip problems in this text. Abraham didn't govern a nation state such as contemporary Israel. His people were Hebraic nomads. Is it correct then to superimpose ancient promises of a special land for Jews on contemporary Israel? Ancient Hebrews occupied the land of Canaan after evicting tribes such as Kenites, the Kenizzites, the Hittites, and other native people. These Hebrews believed God wanted them to show no mercy to primitive Canaanites. Invading Hebrews rid the land of many artifacts of Canaanite culture. Abraham's followers committed atrocities against Canaan's original dwellers. Doesn't their defense of atrocities sound like Christian Protestants' justification for dislodging Native Americans from sacred lands on the frontier? Did God really tell Christians to rout the savages from their lands? This is kind of ironic coming from a guy who lives in Colorado. Some evangelicals ignore these thorny questions. They support Jerusalem as Israel's capital because that's God's game plan. While this decision was not made exclusively in response to evangelicals, it would not have been made without the evangelical influence, declared Johnny Moore. Some evangelicals believe making Jerusalem Israel's capital fits nicely with biblical prophecy emerging during Donald Trump's presidency. These Christians cobble together obscure texts, rip them from ancient Bible contexts, and concoct timelines of cataclysmic events preceding the world's demise. And listen, I will tell you this, Pastor, that's exactly what we do because that is exactly what the Bible says. Consequently, some evangelicals say naming Jerusalem as capital is pivotal for prophecy to unfold when Jews are converted to Christ prior to Jesus' return to earth. Disbelieving Israelis put up with this nonsense. He goes on. Concludes, bad religion breeds bad political results, such as making Jerusalem Israel's capital. Presbyterian pastor. But don't take it out on him. He's deceived. When you're citing Maureen Dowd, article from 2002, we know where you're coming from. Well, I'll just mention this. This is in foreign policy. 10 conflicts to watch in 2018. It's North Korea, Yemen, Syria, Venezuela, Congo. I mean, there's places all over the world. I mean, you can look that up online and read it. Because this is the world we live in. Jesus said there would be wars, rumors of wars. Don't get discouraged by it. Look at what's going on. Pay attention. Because I think the Bible is, Daniel says, in the end, knowledge will increase. And I think part of this is knowledge of the prophetic scriptures interpreted in the context of the time in which people live. And it says, the wise will understand. We should want to be wise and understand. And that's the time we live in. Let's pray. Father, thank you so much for your word, for your promises. Lord, I pray that you will make us people committed to truth, and also people committed to grace, that we would speak the truth, but do it in love, do it as you instructed us, but to be bold, never wavering. And I pray that you'll give us those opportunities to share the truth of the gospel, which is really the only hope for the world. And we look forward to that time when Jesus returns and sets up his kingdom and rules just as the Bible has said. And we pray that you would fulfill that day in your time and to your glory. In Jesus' name, amen.